Unit Presentation by CHANTELLE Tempanny. The Australian curriculum aims to improve learning outcomes for all young Australians and acknowledges the gap in learning outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. Embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in schools is a key action under the Queensland Government Reconciliation Action Plan. ED4461 aims to provide all Australians with an understanding and respect for Indigenous Australian people, their histories, cultures and beliefs. ED4461 is a useful tool for teachers and school professionals when embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives within school education. The Australian Professional Standards for Teachers states that teachers must be able to effectively cater for Indigenous learners, which is outlined in two specific focus areas, Standards 1.4 and 2.4. Standard 1.4 states that teachers need to demonstrate broad knowledge and understanding of cultural identity, the impacts it may have, and how to cater for this diverse range of students. Standard 2.4 states that teachers must have a broad knowledge and understanding of Indigenous Australian cultures, histories and languages. These professional standards outline the essential need for embedding Indigenous perspectives within education. The James Cook University subject ED4461, Indigenous Futures, engages pre-service teachers with critical Indigenous theory to explore and examine their personal and professional knowledge and beliefs about Indigenous education. The subject educates pre-service teachers on how to prepare Indigenous learners to be global learners. This subject built upon my own professional knowledge of Indigenous education policies, pedagogical theories and curriculum frameworks. Indigenous Futures has equipped me with the knowledge and ability to be able to design, implement and evaluate curriculum, assessment and differentiated learning opportunities. The first assessment task of this subject required me to critically examine a unit plan that was implemented on my third year professional experience. I was required to make suggestions to improve or implement the unit's Indigenous content and perspectives through culturally respectful and appropriate recommendations. The unit plan I critiqued was a C2C unit based on Year 6 mathematics. There was no Indigenous content or perspectives included in the unit. Therefore, the unit plan was a great foundation for suggesting implementation of Indigenous perspectives and pedagogies. During my engagement with the subject Indigenous Futures, a particular framework that stood out to me was the 8 Ways of Aboriginal Learning, which was originally developed by Ernie Grant, a Durabal elder, in 1998, and further adapted by Dr. Tyson Younger Porter in 2009. This framework puts forward 8 ways of learning that are beneficial for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous learners. The 8 ways of learning are story sharing, learning maps, non-verbal, symbols and images, land links, non-linear, deconstruct, reconstruct, and community links. Upon original reflection, it was suggested that story sharing in the form of yarning be implemented at the end of each maths lesson. Story sharing is an Indigenous form of communication where people are able to verbally communicate. It was suggested that yarning be implemented to let non-Indigenous learners experience an Indigenous way of communicating and allow Indigenous students to make a link between their own culture and ways of communicating with a school context. Feedback from my assessment task 1 stated that there are particular times when to be explicit and when not to be explicit in using yarning circles. Upon reflection of this feedback, it is now clear that yarning circles are effective. However, it may be more beneficial to implement yarning circles at particular times during the unit plan for specific reasons, rather than at the end of each and every maths lesson. Further feedback from Assessment Task 1 suggested to find solutions for when Indigenous elders, community members or other visitors may be unavailable to come into the classroom to share Indigenous perspectives. Upon reflection of this feedback, it has been shown that there are other ways to incorporate Indigenous perspectives when guests may be unavailable. This could be through engaging with visual and audio resources such as TED Ed or YouTube videos that provide Indigenous perspectives on culture, histories, beliefs, and story sharing. The effective use of implementing Indigenous perspectives and pedagogies within the unit plan for Assessment Task 1 included other aspects of Younger Porter's 8 Ways of Aboriginal Learning. Due to the word limit restrictions for Assessment Task 1, the unit plan that was critiqued was only critiqued against 5 of the 8 ways of Aboriginal learning. It was suggested that yarning circles be embedded, as they are a simple yet effective way to embed Indigenous means of communication and reflection. Younger Porter suggests implementing learning maps to support Indigenous learners with being able to visualise and regularly reflect upon their learning journey. It was suggested that within the unit, students would create their own individual learning map and reflect upon their progress at the end of each lesson to see how much learning they have achieved and what they need to do next. To implement non-verbal strategies, it was suggested that concrete learning materials were provided as much as possible, as Indigenous people have used hands-on learning for many decades as cultural practices. To implement symbols and images, it has been suggested that students come up and create their own individual and creative symbols that they think represent the 6 different mathematics concepts that they will be learning about throughout the unit. This allows Indigenous learners to demonstrate their own cultural understanding of creating symbols. To implement land links, it is suggested that students use land and objects within their local community when learning about specific mathematics concepts, such as measuring angles of objects or measuring volume and capacity of items within their area. It is also suggested that students engage in learning outside of the standard classroom, such as learning out on the playground or oval, where they can learn in a natural and open environment. It is essential that teachers embed Indigenous perspectives within the school and learning environment through effective learning outcomes. By meeting the needs of Indigenous learners, research has shown that it can improve school attendance, retention, and engagement. Embedding Indigenous perspectives not only supports Indigenous learners, but also supports non-Indigenous learners as well, through providing a richer understanding of Indigenous Australian histories and cultures, and working together for reconciliation.